The afternoon at Gray Mesa Station stretched like the last breath of a worn-out day. The slanting light touched the old tin roof and fell across slow, drifting dust in the wind. The small station sat in the middle of a tired town, where the dirt road turned red again every time the wind changed. No one stood here for joy. Everyone left because something behind them could no longer hold them in place. Abeni Cross tightened her grip on the strap of her cloth bag, the rough weave cutting lightly into her palm. She was 28, a black widow who had lost her home, her land, and the last bit of ground she thought she could stand on. She stood silent at the edge of the platform, her simple dress covered in a thin layer of dust. 6 months ago, she still had a porch to shield her from the weather. Now the whole world she owned fit in a bag so small no one could guess what was inside. In her coat pocket, the last coin lay cold. A small piece of metal, yet her whole survival rested on it. The first meal after 2 days of nothing but water and scraps of dry bread. She held on to it the way a person holds on to the last ounce of pride. Hunger can be endured, but there are moments when it claws at the heart like sharp talons. Footsteps on the wooden platform made her flinch. When she turned, a man stood a few paces away. A cowboy. Not the kind pulled from legend, but the kind the West produced when it grew too tired to make heroes. Worn shirt, dust-stained pants, boots rubbed down to the edge of coming apart. His hair was damp with sweat, and his pale eyes looked strangely exhausted, as if he had traveled too many days up those without stopping. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slightly as he hesitated. "Ma'am." His voice was rough, like wind scraping through a dry throat. "I'm in a bit of trouble." Abeni watched him without speaking. She had grown used to people needing something from her, ever since her husband died, ever since her home was taken, ever since folks looked at her skin before they remembered how to greet her. The cowboy went on, his tired eyes never holding hers for long. "My horse was stolen last night, and with it, my saddlebag. I just need enough for a ticket home. It's only 1 town away. $1, ma'am. I swear I'll pay it back." $1. Abeni knew. That coin lay in her pocket. Her only coin. 1 meal. 1 bit of warmth for her empty stomach. She drew a slow breath. Their eyes met for a brief moment, long enough to see unvarnished truth. This man was at the bottom. So was she. Those who have fallen that far recognize one another without explanation. Her fingers brushed the cold surface of the coin. It was small enough for anyone else to ignore, yet heavy enough that only the one carrying it understood its weight. Her heart tightened. She should keep it. She was starving. Her future was fogged like a winter field. But the man's eyes, tired, yet still holding a quiet line of dignity, kept her from turning away. She extended her hand. When his hand touched hers, a strange warmth passed across her skin. Not lightning, not grand fate. Just a brief, awkward contact, but it lingered the way the last wind of a summer day lingers. He stared at the coin as if he couldn't believe it. Then he looked at her. Long enough that she had to look up first. She said only, "Go home." The train whistle rose in the distance, reminding her that the world waited for no one. She turned, stepped onto the car without looking back. Her stomach twisted with hunger. The hollow inside her felt deeper still. The door closed. Abeni sat on the wooden seat, watching the dusty glass as Gray Mesa Station pulled away and drifted into the last strip of light. She told herself she would never see that man again. The station vanished into a wash of golden dust. Abeni Cross had no idea she had just spoken the greatest mistake of her life. The train swayed as if it too had grown tired of the Western world. Abeni sat close to the window, both hands resting on her lap, her fingers lacing together without thought. Outside, the plains stretched on, dry enough to seem made of nothing but wind and dust. The noon sun beat down, shining through the glass until her eyes ached. She had eaten little for days, and hunger no longer struck sharp. It settled into a slow, heavy weariness. Her shoulders felt weighted with stones, her back throbbed in sections, yet she didn't dare lean into the seat, knowing that if she relaxed even a little, she would fall asleep and wake to something worse. Across the aisle, a boy bit into a fresh loaf of bread. Its warm scent drifted through the draft in the door, striking her empty stomach like a soft, heavy blow. She turned away, fixing her gaze on the barren land ahead, steadying her breath. At some point, Elias Boone's eyes flashed through her mind, tired, honest, carrying a hint of gratitude. She touched her fingers lightly, remembering the brief contact from hours before. She didn't know why it tightened her chest, but she didn't push it aside. On a train with no certainties, the memory of a stranger's steady gaze could be the only thing keeping her upright. The train reached Blue Ridge near dusk. Abeni stepped off with her cloth bag light enough to make no sound. She walked nearly 3 miles toward her sister's farm, the one place she still believed held hope, where she expected a hug, a hot meal, and a corner of a bed for the night. But when the house appeared behind a line of cypress, her heart dropped. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. The chicken coop stood empty. The yard lay brown and stiff as wire. No voices, no animals, no sign of life. "Elizabeth?" she called softly, but her voice disappeared into the air like water dropped on sand. She climbed the steps, her foot touching a layer of dust thick enough to mark time. She pushed the door, and the smell of rot and forgotten wood poured out. No one. Nothing. Only bank papers stamped in red lay tossed on the table. The word "foreclosed" landed like a hammer on her chest. Abeni stood still for a long while, not crying, not breathing deep, as if her body had gone past the point of reacting. She set her bag on the floor, the soft thud sounding like a sigh. The sun slipped away, the last light brushing the wall before fading out. The house sank into the blue-gray of evening, and the world inside her dropped into a darker shade. Cold crept in. She tried to start a fire, but found no dry wood, nothing to burn. She stepped onto the porch and sat on the old plank. The chill of it pressed through her dress, making her shiver. For the first time since leaving Gray Mesa, she allowed her shoulders to fall. And in that moment, truth rose like a wild wind. She was entirely alone. No home, no family, no future. She pulled her knees close, arms wrapped around her legs for warmth. Dust-laden wind sifted through the gaps in the wall, tangling her hair. She drew a long breath, but her throat tightened. On her left hand, she still felt the faint echo of the moment she handed Elias the coin. That small, awkward touch had become the only warmth she carried. She didn't understand why his face, this stranger, burned so clear in her despair. Maybe because he carried something she recognized, a loneliness too deep to name. She covered her face with her hands. Then, unable to hold it back, the first tears since her husband's funeral fell, silent, heavy enough to shake her whole frame. She didn't cry for loss. She cried because there was nowhere left to step next. Night wrapped itself around the empty house. The wind moved along the porch like the land exhaling. Abeni curled on the floorboards, her cloth bag a thin pillow, her hand resting close to her heart. In that darkness, unseen by anyone, she touched the bottom of her life. From here, everything else would begin to change. The next morning, Abeni woke as weak sunlight pushed through a thin veil of clouds. Her vision blurred from little sleep, her body drained from going days, with nothing to sustain her but dry wind. She pulled herself up from the abandoned porch, stretched against the bitter air of the barren land, and began walking. The dirt road ahead stretched endlessly, pulling her forward as if stopping were no longer an option. She had no clear destination, only the sense that she had to move. She didn't know where. She simply stepped, then stepped again. The empty road weighed on her. Dust rose with every footfall, and she moved within a quiet cloud of despair. Weariness circled her like a tightening loop, with no end in sight. After more than an hour of walking, when her strength had nearly given out, she sank down beside the road and felt the silence press around her. Dust coated her face but couldn't hide the sweat gathering on her brow. She had no energy left to move, yet nowhere to stay. Her tired eyes drifted to the distant hills rising from the dry earth. Then a soft voice came from her left. "You've been sitting here a while. Why not come rest a bit?" Abeni turned and saw an older woman standing nearby. May Hollander, a thin, tall, white woman with a face weathered by years, but eyes bright with kindness and understanding. In her hands, she carried a basket of food and a jug of water. "Do you need any help?" May asked, her voice carrying unmistakable concern. "You've been on the road a long time. You look worn out." Abeni lifted her gaze, meeting eyes that watched her not as a stranger, but almost the way a mother watches a child. Warmth rose in her chest, something she had not felt in a long time. "Thank you," Abeni said, her voice rough, lips pressed tight to keep the sob that threatened to escape. She didn't want to cry in front of this woman, yet her strength seemed unable to hold much longer. May sat down beside her, opened the basket, and took out a piece of cornbread. "Eat, child. You need to rest. Hunger doesn't only wear down the body, it drains the spirit." Abeni looked at the bread, her hand trembling as she took it, then began eating in small bites. The sweet taste of corn felt like life returning to her. Yet shame rose in her chest. She had gone so long without allowing herself a full meal, and now eating this simple bread felt almost humiliating. It was May's gift, and Abeni felt as though she owed her. May watched her with a gentle smile. "Don't burden yourself, child. You owe me nothing. I help because I can, and because I saw you help someone once. People like us, when we meet, we understand each other without many words. No reason for shame." Abeni paused, looking at May, then lifted her eyes to the wide sky. May's gaze held a quiet knowing, as if she had seen every hardship Abeni carried. "People like you," May said softly, "always give, even when you have nothing left, and someday, what you give might find its way back." They sat beneath a low tree where the light flickered through the leaves, and for a moment, Abeni felt an unfamiliar calm settle over her. Her life was tangled in loss, her path swallowed by pain too deep to speak, but here, under this small tree, someone looked at her not with pity, but with understanding. The early days at Hollander's Rest passed slowly, like a thin stream running through the dry season. No noise, no drama, only soft mornings, windy afternoons, and small tasks that kept a wounded spirit from falling apart. Abeni rose before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. She folded her blanket, tied her hair with an old strip of cloth, and headed to the kitchen while the boarding house still lay in darkness. The wood stove held no warmth yet, but she liked those first moments. The cold air on her hands, the faint smell of dry timber, the quiet of a day not yet awake. She lit the fire with small pieces of wood, and the flame grew, sending warmth into the room. She felt it like a slow embrace, a reminder that life hadn't abandoned her entirely. Cornbread, stewed beans, fried eggs, coffee, simple food, yet every traveler praised it. Abeni worked with hands accustomed to hardship, but there was a careful grace in the way she moved. When she stirred the pot or placed bread on a plate, it was as if she set into it the one thing she had rarely been given: kindness. "You have the hands of someone who once cared for the whole world," May said one morning, standing in the doorway with a look of quiet pride. Abeni smiled, shy. "I'm only starting over, May." "Starting over takes courage, child." Every word May spoke, light as it was, pulled Abeni one step back from the edge. In her life, white women seldom gave her warmth. Most offered caution or judgment. But May was different. She touched Abeni's shoulder when she looked tired, poured more coffee when the cold crept in, and every night asked the same simple question: "Are you all right today?" She had not heard anyone ask her that in years. Travelers came and went, dusty riders, families searching for rest, merchants who needed a hot meal. Abeni served them, listened to scraps of their stories, and slowly came to understand that the world was larger than her own loss. But at night, when Hollander's Rest went quiet, when the wind brushed the wooden hall like a tired sigh, her thoughts drifted back to Gray Mesa, back to that brief touch of her hand against another, back to the pale, weary eyes of the stranger, eyes that felt both foreign and familiar in some deep corner of her heart. Some nights she sat alone in the kitchen, a small oil lamp glowing on the table, casting yellow streaks across the rough wood. She set her hand on her other palm as if trying to feel again the quick touch they shared. A small touch, but one her heart refused to forget. "He isn't coming back," she whispered to herself. But her heart, after all it had survived, no longer had the strength to believe her. She remembered the way he looked at the ground, as if wanting to say more than he did. How he stood slightly angled, keeping distance, while his eyes moved closer. On nights like that, the nameless pull in her chest grew stronger. Not love. How could she love someone she'd known for minutes? But something else. Elias Boone had been the one person in her darkest hours who clung to his last bit of decency the same way she clung to hers. Maybe she missed him because they were alike. Both worn down, both beaten by life, both living at the bottom. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the boarding house and cast its last gold across the yard, Abeni was hanging blankets to dry when the bell at the front door rang. The sound was small, nothing more than metal lightly striking, but it chilled her spine, as if the stillness of her quiet days had suddenly cracked. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped toward the front porch. She touched the doorknob, her palm damp with a nervousness she could not name. The door opened. A man stood there. Strong posture, clean clothes, a serious face, and eyes as blue as the ones she had told herself to forget. Elias Boone. And in that moment, Abeni felt her breath turn tight, as though she had just stepped into a story whose ending she could no longer predict. For a moment, as the door swung open, every sound in Hollander's Rest vanished as if someone had pulled a heavy curtain over the whole world. The wind stopped. The horses outside fell silent. Only her own breathing remained, thin as a thread. The man standing before her was nothing like the memory she carried from Gray Mesa Station. Gone were the torn clothes, the boots ready to fall apart, the shoulders weighed down by exhaustion. In their place stood a man in a clean white shirt, a pressed leather coat, polished boots, and a face washed free of dust. But his eyes, the blue eyes she recognized at once, still held the quiet gentleness that had unsettled her from the start. "Abeni Cross?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Her breath caught in her throat. She could only nod. Elias Boone held his hat against his chest, standing straight, but not with the cold stance of the cowboys she'd known. Something in the way he carried himself showed restraint, and emotions he had not let loose. I've been looking for you, he said. For 3 weeks. Her heart stalled. 3 weeks? Why? Why? She asked, her voice so small she barely heard it herself. Elias tightened his grip on the hat, his eyes dropping for a second before meeting hers again. Because I owed you, and because I couldn't let it go. You gave away your last coin without asking for anything in return. Their eyes locked, longer than at the station, warmer, carrying apology, promise, and something neither had the courage to name. Abeni stepped aside, letting him in. Elias walked through the doorway, and the light inside the boarding house revealed even more clearly how much he had changed. He stood straighter, more sure of himself, nothing like the desperate man she had met on the platform. I thought you were just a traveler who ran into trouble, she said quietly. I was in trouble, he replied. Just not the way you think. He released a long breath, as though freeing something he had carried for weeks. I don't live off a cowboy's wages. I own Boone Ridge Ranch. The air in the room shifted. Abeni swallowed. Boone Ridge Ranch. No one in Mesa County didn't know the name. A spread of land, workers by the dozens, thousands of acres. She stared at him, unable to match the man before her with the worn stranger from the station. But there was no pride in his expression, only sincerity. What you saw that day, Elias paused, was only part of the truth. I did lose my horse. I did lose my saddlebag. But there's something you didn't know. I was traveling without my name. I wanted to see how people treated a man with nothing. He looked at her again, longer this time. And you were the only one who gave even when you had nothing to spare. Abeni felt her hands tremble, not from shock, but from the way he said only one, as if she had been the lone bright spot in a journey that had stripped a man of his faith in people. Elias reached into his vest and took out a silver coin. Yours, he said quietly. He held it out, and when she reached to take it, their hands touched again. Not by accident, not a quick brush. This time slower, warmer, enough to send her heart stumbling. She pulled back too quickly, and Elias smiled, a small, calm smile like the soft wind of a summer evening. "I'm giving the coin back," he said. "But that's not the only reason I came." Abeni lifted her head, her chest tightening with a strange intuition. "I want to invite you to Boone Ridge Ranch," he said. "We run a support program for workers' families, children, widows, the elderly. I need someone who understands people, someone patient, someone kind, someone like you." Her mouth opened, but no words came. The offer was too large, too sudden, too life-shaping. Elias stepped a little closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth rising from him. "I believe you can do what others don't dare to try." Abeni stood there with the silver coin in her palm, her heart beating as if it were trying to run from her chest. She had no way of knowing that this moment, this man, this invitation, would open not just a job, but an entirely new life. And she had no way of knowing that from this point forward, her fate would intertwine with Elias Boone far more than she ever imagined. Boone Ridge rose under the afternoon sun like a stretch of land both breathing and alive, wide enough that Abeni needed several moments to grasp she was standing before a world unlike any she had known. Wooden fences ran along a gentle slope, cattle spread across the yellow grass, and in the distance stood a small cabin beneath an old oak, the place Elias had told her would be hers. "It's been empty a long while," he said, standing beside her, hat pulled low. "But if you like it, it's yours." Abeni nodded. The cabin was simple, but peaceful. Peaceful enough for her guarded heart to release a quiet breath. A week settled into a new rhythm. Learning tasks, taking notes, inspecting cabins, listening to people, and meeting the kind of small collisions between her and Elias that neither acknowledged, yet neither avoided. On the first morning, Elias guided her through the workers' quarters. He steadied her as she stepped down from the wagon, his hand lingering for a heartbeat at her elbow, warm enough to reach her shoulder. She drew back slightly, not from discomfort, but from unfamiliarity. She wasn't used to any man noticing her movements. That evening, as they bent over the same ledger, their hands touched again. This time Elias didn't pull away. He only glanced at her, subtle, almost invisible, but Abeni felt it. She looked aside, hiding a brief tremor in her breath. The next day, when Elias taught her to ride the gentlest horse on the ranch, he stood behind her, placing his hands over hers to correct her grip on the reins. His chest nearly brushed her back. She heard his breathing, steady, deep, but no longer entirely calm. She swallowed, letting the horse take a few slow steps, pretending she didn't feel the small shock of every point where they touched. When the real work began, Abeni threw herself into it as if it were the one anchor keeping her steady in this unfamiliar place. She organized the pantry for the workers' families, people who scraped together coins to buy flour, salt, beans. She walked from cabin to cabin, listening to the women speak of hard winters, thin blankets, sick children. Slowly, she was no longer just welcomed. She was loved. Children ran after her whenever they saw the pale brown scarf wrapped around her hair. The smallest girl tugged at her skirt and whispered, "Miss Abeni." Abeni knelt and lifted the child into her arms. The tiny embrace warmed her, as though it touched something long broken inside her. A few steps away, Elias leaned against the fence, watching with an expression he himself didn't realize he was showing. Since when? Since when had she made the ranch breathe a little easier? Since when had he begun to see her as part of this place? Since when had he seen her as home? Evenings in the communal kitchen brought more small moments, quiet, close, and harder to ignore. One afternoon, as she kneaded dough, Elias walked in carrying the fading daylight. She looked up, stray hairs falling across her brow. Without a word, he brushed a streak of flour from her cheek. The touch made her spine straighten, as if she'd stepped into something forbidden. "It smudged," Elias said, voice soft as a passing breeze. She turned away, ears warm. Another evening, when the wind blew hard, her scarf slipped from her shoulders. Elias fixed it for her, his hands resting briefly on her collarbone. Neither spoke, but the distance between them shortened in a way neither tried to undo. Each morning she brought him coffee on the porch. He held the cup with both hands instead of one, as if giving their fingers an extra second to meet. Day by day, every small touch, every glance, every caught breath wove a thin thread neither dared to pull tight, yet neither wished to break. One night after work, Abeni stepped outside, the wind sweeping across her hair. She looked toward the low cabins where warm lamplight glowed through windows, where women she had helped rocked their children, where soft laughter drifted into the night. She pressed a hand to her chest, over a heart that had broken too many times to count. A strange longing rose in her, not just to keep living, not just to survive, but to make something larger, something that could change the lives of people like her. Abeni looked toward the silhouette of Elias Boone standing by the fence. She didn't know that this longing, and this man, would lead her farther than any road she had walked before. And she didn't know that everything was only beginning. A sudden storm rolled in, dragging winds strong enough to tear at anything in their path. The cabin door rattled open, rain hammering against the wooden roof. Darkness and thunder closed in, making the small space feel tight, yet strangely safe. Abeni stood by the window watching the world outside disappear. Wind whipped through the grain fields, and patches of loosened soil slid down from the distant slopes. She wasn't afraid, but the storm's force carried a sense of separation, as if everything she once knew had been washed away, leaving only the present moment. Elias stepped into the cabin, shutting the door firmly behind him. He pulled off his damp coat and hung it near the stove. His blue eyes settled on her, not anxious, but calm, as if he had learned to live with things that couldn't be changed. "We won't be going out tonight," he said. "This storm will last a while." Abeni nodded. She was used to silence between them. Over the past weeks, they had learned to share quiet without feeling the need to fill it. After a moment, Elias walked toward her and lifted the coat from her shoulders. He looked at her gently, then wrapped her in the thick wool sweater he had brought. Warmth settled over her, and with it came a sense of protection that needed no explanation. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias pulled a chair close to the fire and sat an arm's reach away. In the steady roar of rain beating on the roof, they sat together without speaking. The quiet wasn't heavy, only steady. At last he broke it. "I'm not used to this," he said. She turned. "Used to what?" He watched the fire before looking at her. "Not being alone." The words struck something deep inside her, something she hadn't touched in years. "I understand," she breathed. Elias leaned slightly toward her. "You do?" She gave a slow, fragile smile. "After Jacob died, I became used to having no one beside me. Even when people were around, I still felt outside." Elias didn't interrupt. He simply listened, an uncommon thing for a Western man. "The day I gave you that coin," she continued, "I thought it was the last decent thing I could do before everything ended." Elias tilted his head. "Ended?" "My life," she said plainly. "Or at least the part of me that still felt like myself." His eyes didn't leave hers. She turned to meet his gaze, and in that long moment, everything unspoken between them carried its own meaning. Elias reached out and brushed the back of her hand. A touch not hurried, not claiming, only comforting, asking permission. Abeni didn't pull away, and in that small gesture, the distance between them dissolved. Naturally, without words, he drew her closer. Their first night together unfolded with no urgency, no strain, just two souls meeting in the one place neither expected to find shelter. A night needing no explanation, no reason, only breath and quiet understanding. At dawn, Abeni woke to the warmth of Elias beside her. She lifted her head and saw him sleeping, his arm resting lightly over her, not restricting, only peaceful. She stayed still, unwilling to disturb the calm. Then he moved slightly, brushing her hand as if he sensed she was awake. "Don't go," he murmured, voice rough with sleep, yet full of tenderness. She swallowed, rising a little, but he held her hand gently. "Not yet," he said, still soft. She looked back at him, and for the first time in years, she felt she didn't have to strain just to keep living. The weight of loneliness and loss slid away, replaced by a quiet peace she never thought she'd feel again. Morning drifted by gently as they made breakfast together. Stirring batter, cracking eggs, their hands brushing when both reached for the pan, or when Elias paused to watch her tie her hair. Every small gesture became part of a shared rhythm, a rhythm in which Abeni no longer felt alone. They began noticing each other in ways no longer subtle. Every word, every glance, every small touch carrying meaning neither of them tried to hide. Their connection had moved beyond necessity, into something neither could ignore, something quietly precious. The days after the storm passed with a steady rhythm, carrying a new kind of life through Boone Ridge. It was no longer just a place to work. It became a shared heartbeat, a place where Abeni stepped into each morning and felt her skin take in the sunlight, the dust, the children's laughter, and the warmth of the people around her. Elias often walked beside her, not because the work required it, but because every time he watched her silhouette move across the red earth, his heart shifted in a direction he could no longer deny. Abeni visited the small cabins, knocking on doors, checking on the workers' wives. "Do you sew? Have you ever tried baking pies? Anyone here ever worked with leather?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes lit up whenever a woman nodded, as if she saw a small seed pushing up through dry soil after the rain. One afternoon, while they were out on the drying grounds, Abeni offered an idea. "Elias, I want to open a cooperative house, a shared place, where the women here can work, create, earn their own money." Elias turned to her. "Go on." "A sewing room, a few machines, a baking corner to sell goods in town, a space for small leather work." She drew a breath. "I think they deserve a chance to stand on their own feet." Elias didn't answer at once. He looked at her, long, deep, with pride in his eyes, as if she had spoken something he had waited to hear from a heart large enough to understand the weight carried by the women around them. "Do it," he said, his voice softening. "Boone Ridge will stand behind you." Abeni turned to him, her heart tightening. And as always, the moment almost became a kiss. if they hadn't both looked down at the same time, like two people afraid to disturb something fragile, new and growing like the first leaf of spring. The cooperative house opened 3 weeks later, a small wooden building Elias had restored. On the first day, the sewing machines clacked like drums announcing change. Women laughed, threads snapped, dough rose, leather split clean under strong hands. Children ran circles on the porch. Abeni stood in the center of it all, her palm pressed to her chest, feeling life return through her whole body. She had once believed her heart was taken from her the day Jacob died. But now, in the midst of these sounds, she felt it beating again, strong and clear. Elias stood in the doorway watching her. He saw the way she lifted a child into her arms, the way she rested a steady hand on a woman's shoulder, the way she smiled, truly smiled, as if she had found her own freedom again. No one said it aloud, but Elias knew. She had become the soul of Boone Ridge. And between the work, there were moments between them, small, sharp, more telling than any confession. When Abeni dismounted a horse, Elias waited below, one hand on the reins, the other lifting to steady her back. The touch lasted only seconds, yet it stole her breath, afraid she might reveal too much. When he guided her through a fence, his hand rested lightly on her back. Brief, but warm. Short, yet enough to shake her heartbeat. One afternoon in the cooperative house kitchen, Elias tried to make coffee. Abeni stood beside him, watching him fumble until the scent filled the room before the water even boiled. She laughed, a soft, unforced sound. Elias looked at her, drawn closer, his blue eyes lingering on the curve of her smile. For one suspended moment, only one step separated them from a kiss. But Elias turned away, flustered in a way he couldn't hide. Abeni bit her lip, unable to meet his eyes. They both knew that if they let that moment happen, nothing would ever be the same again. Yet neither of them wanted to break the fragile beauty growing between them. One late autumn afternoon, when the sun was nothing more than thin streaks across the Boone Ridge hills, Abeni found a small letter on the kitchen table. The handwriting was familiar, soft, as if written with a breath. "Come to Hollander's Rest this evening for tea. I have something to tell you. May." She held the letter for a long moment, as if it were a signal calling her back to a life she had almost left behind. She saddled her horse and rode along the winding road through the hills, moving through the scent of oak leaves falling in slow spirals. The old boarding house appeared ahead, small, worn, but still opening its arms like a memory that refused to fade. May stood on the porch with a warm pot of tea, smiling. "You're here. I've been waiting since noon." Abeni stepped onto the wooden steps, feeling like she was walking back into the first place that had saved her after the darkest days of her life. The sitting room looked the same, the old rocking chair, the vase of wildflowers, the sun-faded curtains. Everything was so quiet she could hear the wind slipping through the gaps in the doorframe. May poured tea for both of them. The steam rose gently, but Abeni noticed her hands trembled, a rare sign from a woman who almost never let her weakness show. "You're wondering why I asked you here," May began. Abeni nodded softly. "Is something wrong?" May looked into her eyes with a tender weight, something gentle yet heavy with truth. "Child, it's time I told you something." Abeni's heart paused mid-beat. May set her hand over Abeni's, warm, steady, motherly. "I am Elias Boone's mother." The words fell, Not like lightning, but like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending ripples widening through her chest. Abeni stared at her, absolutely still. All sound in the room seemed to vanish. "You are Elias's mother?" she whispered. May nodded. "Yes. I am May Hollander Boone." Abeni sank back in her chair, her hands tightening together. The room seemed to tilt around her. May continued, her voice slow and deep, like a story told beside a fire. "That day when Elias returned to the boarding house, he told me a woman had given him her last coin. You know what he's like. Strong on the outside, but tender as rain-soft earth on the inside. He couldn't bear to accept help from someone whose name he didn't know and couldn't repay." She glanced toward the window, her expression softening at the memory. "He sent me a telegram, asked me to find a black widow, worn black dress, hand-stitched satchel. You." She turned back to Abeni. "I looked for you all day. I finally saw you beneath that tree by the road, exhausted, hopeless, but with a light still left in your eyes." Her voice cracked near the end. "I knew then. You were the one I'd been sent to find." Abeni covered her mouth with her hand. "You knew from that moment?" "No," May said gently. "When I brought you here, I only knew you needed help. But later that night, when you spoke about the coin at dinner, everything became clear." It wasn't anger she felt. It wasn't betrayal. It was the weight of truth striking the deepest part of her. Abeni gripped her hands tightly. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" May leaned forward and cupped Abeni's cheek, the touch of a mother, not a stranger. "Because you were still too fragile. You needed to stand again on your own feet. If I told you then, you'd believe everything you gained came from Elias, or from me, and not from your own strength." Her voice trembled. "I wanted you to know you deserved it, that you were strong, that you saved yourself before anyone else could." A long silence opened between them, wide as the valley outside. Abeni lowered her head. Tears slipped quietly down her hands. Not sobs, not shaking, just falling like night rain. I don't know what to say," she whispered. May pulled her into an embrace. Slow, steady, complete. The kind of warmth Abeni hadn't felt since losing her own mother. "You don't need to say anything," May murmured. "Just know this. Elias didn't search for you out of obligation. He searched for you because you touched his heart." Abeni shuddered softly against her. She no longer held herself stiff, no longer tried to be strong. Not here. Not now. In that small, familiar room, in the arms of the woman who had quietly led her back to life, Abeni wept. Not from pain, but from the deep knowledge that her destiny had been woven long before she recognized the thread. She let herself cry in May's embrace, like a daughter who had finally found her mother again, and like a woman who finally understood that the road leading her to Boone Ridge had never been chance. That morning, the sky over Boone Ridge held a soft blue, as if washed clean after a week of scattered rain. Abeni stood by the window of her cabin, looking out across the wide eastern stretch, where the first light of day laid thin gold across the earth. A place wide enough to begin something meaningful. A place quiet enough to mend lives broken like hers once was. The idea of Silver Haven, a home for widows, abandoned women, those with nowhere else to go, had grown in her bit by bit. Today, she decided to speak it aloud. In Elias's office, sunlight came through the window and glinted across the ranch map pinned on the wall. He was reviewing payroll when she entered, holding her sketch rolled under one arm. He looked up the moment he heard her steps. "You're here." Just 2 words, but his voice was soft in a way that drew her closer. She laid the sketch on his desk. "I have something I want to discuss with you." Elias stepped beside her, tilting his head to read the page. "Silver Haven," he read slowly. "A refuge for women." Abeni nodded. "For those who have nowhere else. A place to learn skills, to eat well, to sleep in a real bed. I want them to have what I didn't." Elias was silent for a moment. He didn't question it, didn't doubt it, didn't ask for proof. He only rested his hand on the edge of the drawing, as though touching something precious. Then he stepped behind her, a slow, careful movement, not imposing, but close enough that she felt his breath graze her neck as he leaned in to study the details. Abeni froze. Her skin prickled at the warmth of him behind her. She tried to focus on the page, but her hand holding its corner suddenly felt weak. "You've thought through every detail," Elias said, his voice low, very close. "A communal kitchen, sewing rooms, learning space, proper beds." He paused. She felt his breath brush her skin again. "This idea, it's your heart." He said it like a confession. Her cheeks warmed. She lowered her head, letting the sunlight hide the flush on her face. "I just want them to have a chance." Elias straightened, but his hand brushed her back, unplanned or intentional, he didn't know. A brief touch, not holding, not pulling, but enough to quicken her heartbeat. "We'll build it," he said. No hesitation, no calculation. Only truth. Abeni looked up. Their eyes met, and for the first time neither of them looked away. When they surveyed the land later that afternoon, the sun hung low. Its slanted rays caught her hair, making it appear softer, gentler. She walked ahead, sketch in hand, talking about windows, airflow, rooms for children. Elias followed just behind her, listening as though hearing the breath of a dream taking shape. At a small rise in the ground, Abeni stumbled on a root. A startled breath left her lips. Elias reached her instantly, arms circling her waist. A simple moment, yet like slow lightning. She fell back into him, her back against his chest. They stilled, breath overlapping. Neither rushed to step apart. Abeni rested her hand on his arm a moment longer than she should have. Not to cling, only because she felt safe in the wordless hold. Elias tightened his arm slightly, just enough to ask without words, "Are you all right? Can you lean on me?" She drew a small breath. "I just tripped." "I know," he said, voice warm, "but I still want to hold you a while." The words tightened something in her chest. She stood upright slowly, but did not step away. They looked at each other beneath the late sun, a moment as fragile as it was real. Another almost kiss, another pause, not from fear, but because they both knew what was growing between them needed the right timing. Silver Haven soon became their daily focus. Abeni redrew designs. Elias hired workers, measured materials, asked the ranch families for input. Their teamwork was so natural that outsiders assumed they had worked together for years. Word spread through town. The local paper sent a reporter. They wrote, "Boone Ridge Ranch, where compassion is cultivated, led by a black widow reshaping the future. Abeni read the article in the fading light, her heart swelling with something between disbelief and pride. Elias stood behind her, one hand braced on the doorway, his eyes never leaving her. No words needed, no touch required. But Abeni knew there was a second heartbeat keeping pace with her own. The opening day of Silver Haven ended in laughter, warm voices, and the soft glow of women who had finally found a place to breathe. Abeni stood on the porch, watching them walk through the new doorway. The doorway she once wished had existed for her when she was lost on the road. In the crowd, at the far edge of the yard, Elias stood where he always did, behind everyone, watching quietly, his eyes never leaving her. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, he walked toward her. "Abeni," he said softly, as if not wanting to break her thoughts. "Would you walk with me a bit?" She nodded, her heart stirring at the tone in his voice. Not the ranch owner, not the measured man she first met, but an Elias who sounded uncertain. They walked along the dirt path behind Silver Haven. The hills glowed amber in the dusk, the last light spreading over them like worn autumn leaves. After a time, Elias stopped. Beneath an old elm, he held a small wooden box, weathered, its grain scratched by years. He turned it over gently, as if touching a memory. "There's something I want to show you." Abeni waited, silent. He opened the box. Inside, resting on dark velvet, lay the silver coin. Her coin. Her fingers tightened. "You kept it?" Elias nodded. "From the moment you placed it in my hand, I've carried it with me." He looked down at the coin, then lifted his gaze. His blue eyes softened in the fading light. "That day, I was close to losing faith in everything. In myself, in people. I thought no one helped anyone anymore unless they expected something back." He traced the edge of the coin, his voice dropping to a raw sincerity that softened something deep inside her. "Then you appeared, a stranger. No reason, no promise. You gave your last coin to a man you owed nothing." He stepped closer. "You were the reason I believed again." Abeni drew a sharp breath, her throat tightening. Her kindness had been used against her so many times. No one had ever said it saved them. "Elias," she whispered, "I only did what my heart told me." He smiled, a rare smile, gentle, honest, faintly unsteady. "And that heart," he said, "changed my life." Elias set the wooden box aside and reached into his coat. He took out a ring. Gold, simple, hand-forged, uneven in places, but bearing the quiet beauty of something made with intention. "I took the gold from the West Valley," he said, "from the land you chose for Silver Haven." The air around her seemed to still, as if the whole field stopped to listen. He took her hand, firm enough to speak the truth, light enough to let her pull away if she wished. "Abeni Cross," he said, voice low and steady. "Not because you saved me with that coin, not because you changed Boone Ridge, but because each morning I want to live a life with you in it." He lowered himself to one knee, not grand, not showy, but with the quiet humility of a man who loved without noise. "Will you be my partner? Walk beside me, not as someone I owe, but as someone I choose." Tears filled Abeni's eyes. not from surprise, but because part of her had always known her path was leading here. She lifted her hand to his cheek, her fingers trembling. Yes. One word, enough to send the last light of day falling around them like a blessing. Elias rose and wrapped his arms around her. Abeni leaned into him, feeling, for the first time in her life, not just sheltered, but accompanied. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she knew. The day she gave away her last coin had brought her to this moment. Not through miracle, but through the one thing she had never let the world take from her: her kindness. The wedding took place on a quiet afternoon, when the wind from the Boone Ridge fields brushed gently across the pale gold grass. There was no music, no strong drink, no crowd. Only the people who needed to be there. May, the women from the cooperative house, a few trusted ranch hands, and the children who followed Abeni every morning. They built a small arch from oak branches, a simple white ribbon tied across it. An old rug, washed clean, sun-dried, marked the place where they would stand. Plain, modest, but sacred in a way that belonged to Abeni's life. It never took much for something to become holy. Elias waited beneath the arch, wearing a white shirt and a brown vest, a thin veil folded carefully in his hands. When Abeni walked toward him, in her quiet, simple dress, his breath slowed, unable to hide what rose in his chest. Then, in front of everyone, he lifted the veil and laid it behind her shoulders, a soft kiss to her forehead, a vow spoken without sound. She looked up at him, her dark eyes full and steady. He smiled, small, gentle, as if afraid a larger smile might spill the emotion he could barely contain. Throughout the ceremony, Abeni held Elias's hand and never once let go. Not out of fear, not out of show, but because after years of holding herself together, she could finally rest a little, in the hand of a man who had proved he stood with her, not over her. Their vows were brief and simple, in the style of the two of them. Elias promised to stand beside her through quiet days and storm days. Abeni promised to guard the home they built with kindness and respect. When they exchanged rings, the children cheered. When they kissed, May wiped her eyes and pretended it was dust. Dinner took place on the porch of their little home, the one Elias had rebuilt exactly the way she wanted. Food cooked by Abeni and the women of the cooperative house. Lanterns lined the railing. The scent of baked bread, roasted meat, and fresh pine drifted in the evening air. The two of them sat close, wrapped in a peace they had spent half a lifetime trying to reach. As night fell and the chirping of field crickets rose, Elias rested his head on her shoulder. So natural, so unforced, it loosened something deep inside her. "I never thought we'd have a day like this," she whispered. Elias nodded softly. "Neither did I. But when you walked into my life, everything began to take shape again." She laid her hand over his. No more words. Silence was the language that suited them best. 1 year passed. Silver Haven expanded with another row of rooms. The cooperative house doubled its sewing tables. Boone Ridge became a place where women in hardship arrived seeking the first spark of hope. And the small home of Abeni and Elias always seemed full of new laughter. One early spring morning, a baby's cry filled the bedroom. Elias rose before she did, clumsy but determined, lifting the tiny, warm 1-month-old boy. A son, brown-eyed like his mother, soft curls like both of them. Abeni sat up, leaning against the window frame, watching Elias hold their child. The sight was so simple, it felt like a dream she would never have dared to imagine. "Our son," Elias murmured, standing where the early light fell across him. "Jacob Boone," Abeni said quietly. "Your name, and the name of the man who kept me standing in those early years." Elias turned toward her, his eyes full and warm. "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain." He placed their son into her arms. She pressed her forehead to the baby's own, breathing slowly as a completeness she never thought possible eased across her chest. Elias sat beside her, his arm around them both. Three of them, in the morning light, like a living picture of something larger than any sorrow she had carried. A home, a new life, a love built from the smallest, truest kinds of kindness. Abeni rested her head on Elias's shoulder, gazing out across the wide fields beyond the window. "This," she whispered, "is home." And for the first time, truly the first, she felt it in every beat of her heart. If this story warmed your spirit, or stirred memories of someone who once held your hand through your own storms, I would be grateful if you shared a thought in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from, or a simple hello. And if you wish to journey with more gentle tales of the Old West, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. The next story may touch a quiet corner of your heart you haven't visited in years.